70% of the surface of the Earth is in fact sea, and less than 1% of that's protected. So it's absolutely fundamental that we work out ways that we can protect more of the ocean. The oceans are in crisis at the moment, from overfishing, from coral bleaching. We heard today what Mark said about the state of the coral just here in the Maldives. And what I want to talk to you guys about, first of all, is what's your first-hand experience of the state of the oceans, where you've seen devastation from perhaps overfishing or from coral bleaching, and then how would you look at addressing what I think are the key elements that we need to look at for marine conservation, which is a lack of awareness. We need to increase awareness of this problem. There's a lack of governance of dealing with fishing lobbies, dealing with fishermen, or creating marine protected areas. And then there's a massive lack of funding for marine conservation. It is critically underfunded. And I'd like to first of all have your opinion, John, from your amazing adventures. What's your kind of first-hand experience of seeing the terrible state that the ocean's in, and where do you think we could look at, especially with regards to travel and tourism, and trying to address some of these issues?
Terrible state. That's a long. I mean, it could be a long list or a short list, depending on the mood you're in. My experience is I'm not a scientist nor an academician, but a storyteller. I've spent the last 20-odd years traveling around the world, kind of tracing the coastlines of the world. But of course, I'm interested in fishes and reefs, etc. But my real passion is the people we meet, because I think sometimes that gets overlooked. That if there are 7 billion people on the planet now, 3.5 to 4 billion people live within an hour of a coastline. So that whatever happens to the ocean impacts half of the world's population. People come to the ocean for different reasons. The wealthy come because it's beautiful and it's rejuvenating and they can afford it. But the preponderance of people who live on the edge of the sea are poor people who come to work. 16 of the 17th largest megacities in the world are built on the edge of the sea. So what happens to this one big ocean impacts nearly 2/3 of the world's human population. In recent years, my experience has been traveling around the world, funded by National Geographic by Sea Kayak, which was a bit of a shtick. We used these kayaks as ambassadors to kind of allow us to get places we couldn't get otherwise, and they became these ambassadors. So we've done, I think, 8 big expeditions, 1 to each continent, including Oceania, and no one ever asked, "What are you doing here?" Because they just assumed that everyone lives in boats like they do. And I could go through a long list. Everywhere we went, we saw evidence of the 4 same environmental issues. Climate change, which is in part rising seas, but historically along the edges of the sea, it's primarily more storms, more frequent storms, warmer sea surface temperatures. Plastic pollution, everywhere. I was thinking today of the worst plastic beaches I've seen in my travels. Paradise Island, Paradise Beach in the Comoros, and Barren Island in the Falklands. Those are just random. They could be anywhere. So climate change, plastic pollution, overfishing, everywhere. We did a big trip in Croatia, and when the astronauts circle the planet, they look down at planet Earth, they say the most beautiful sea on planet Earth is the Adriatic. And unfortunately, there are very few fish in the Adriatic now. It's completely overfished. The big expeditions by kayak took us from the Aleutian Islands to Vietnam, Croatia, Gabon, around Tasmania, down the Antarctic Peninsula, Gabon, and the coast of Vietnam. And each stop we saw this incredible relationship to man and sea. A couple things stand out. I woke up on say this side of a sand dune in Vietnam, south of Da Nang, and I heard this kind of dull hum. It was 5 in the morning, and I couldn't figure out what it was, so I got out of my tent, I walked over the sand dune, and there were thousands of Vietnamese people standing knee-deep in the water, or doing Tai Chi, or exercising. This was their morning wake-up. They went to the edge of the sea, they went into the ocean, they gossiped, they swam, they exercised, but it was the ocean that it was where they started the day, and it's where they ended the day. A few days later, or a couple weeks later, we were further north up near the very southern edge of Halong Bay in Cat Ba, and we were in a very crowded bay, and I decided to go for a swim. And I went for a swim, and immediately the locals panicked, and they pulled me out of the water, and they literally picked me up and put me in a rain barrel full of fresh water, because they said, we do not swim here. You know, so just within a matter of a couple hundred miles, there was a huge disparity in both the relationship between the sea and elsewhere. I think we're going to talk a little bit about aquaculture, et cetera, as we go on, so I'll save some of that.
And Daryl, so a lot of people say that the problems with the ocean are out of sight, out of mind, and people can't actually see that there is a problem with the ocean. In your experience, how can we get more people to be aware of the problem in the ocean?
Could you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he was asking about awareness, how to create awareness. I mean, that's obviously a huge challenge because less than 1% of the world's population has been under the ocean. So they can't really, it's hard to care about something when you've never experienced it or seen it. But I personally respond like best to if in terms of campaigns or messaging to irreverent humor. I mean, it seems to reach people, the best, whether it's, this type of advertising that the Virgin Group uses in their ads, or there's a great company now called Advertisers Without Borders, and they have a new campaign for the oceans where someone has actually picked up the edge of the ocean like it's a blanket and looked underneath and found plastic bottles, like you were saying, but it's an incredible ad because it's the way that he's lifting the ocean is just, it's like, it makes your brain twist. Or I love the sort of irreverent humor of artists like Banksy that kind of wake you up but also make you think about things in a different way, or activists like the Yes Men who really point out the hypocrisy and strange situations we're in. And I think sending messages with that and taking that into account. There was a campaign that I heard, I believe Karina, you mentioned it to me, that they did about freshwater concerns in New York, where they had an actress in New York City carrying a plastic water bucket on her head, like most of the women around the world do, to go collect water, and she marched from her apartment in the city into Central Park, went to Central Park and collected water. I got in a long line, queued up for her, for her water, got in a line, and then she gets to the pond in the middle of Central Park, fills up her water bucket, and then goes back to illustrate that that's, how most people in the world drink, and that's the quality of water as well. They pour it out, and it's all dirty and, filled with muck. And so I think that those kinds of messages, when they have a bit of, we hear this bad news, and it's coming. Oh, sorry, hello, can you hear me? I'll just talk loud. But we hear this bad news, and it's coming from everywhere, and it's on all fronts, from population to, thank you, baby. So it's coming from everywhere. It's on every single front, from overpopulation to, the state of the oceans, the acidification, the plastic pollution, on every level. Obviously, we all have heard it a million times. It's bad news, and people, I think, like to hide from that. They're not drawn to it. We're drawn to the light. And I think humor is the best way of telling those stories. Of course, anything that's moving emotionally is a great way to get the word out as well. But since obviously we're not going to get the majority of the population to scuba dive or snorkel and see firsthand the change, then I think that the messaging that reaches them on an emotional and humorous level is the best way.
People say that this is the biggest solvable problem in the world, the crisis in the oceans, is that a lot of people, scientists, like Sylvia Earle and Boris Worm and Daniel Crawley, they're all incredibly hopeful that yes, we are in danger, we are overfishing it, we are throwing all of our rubbish into the ocean, but we know what we need to do, we know we need to protect it, we know we need to put sustainable fishing methods in. How do you think, Fabien, that we can actually communicate this hope, and we can galvanize people to become ocean advocates, to feel that they want to help preserve the ocean, and to put back and to do something?
Well, Chris, you hit the nail right on the head. It's we're bombarded every day with bad news, and of course we know the results of that. As Daryl was saying, that vinegar doesn't attract too many bees. But you know, I have a weird and unique perspective, and been blessed in having been now third generation to see the oceans and our ocean world from the bottom up. And that gives kind of a different angle on things as far as the impacts and how man is related to the oceans and our water planet in general. That in of itself is something we all need to remember, is that water is the universal connector. But beyond all the problems that we're facing today, one of the things that pops into my mind the most is something my grandfather used to say, which is, if man were only logical, the future would look bleak indeed, but man is more than logical. He has faith and he has hope. And those things are great motivators. Human beings can create miracles in a short amount of time. Take, for example, some of the restoration projects out there that are happening both on land and in the sea. If you get enough of a synergistic approach to it, an empowerment approach to it, you can have people figure out innovative solutions and create or breathe new life into this one and only life support system that we have. It's not about saving the fish, it's not about saving the whales, it's not about saving the corals, it's really about saving that which we've taken for granted to give back to our future generations. On a pragmatic level, there are a lot of opportunities on the business level and such, as long as we figure into our spreadsheets the cost of doing business with regard to our environment. Take, for example, what we did with Plant to Fish down in El Salvador. The main culprits of the decimation of the turtle populations down there is a group called the Tortugueros. They're equivalent to fishermen, basically, and make their living off of the turtle eggs, selling them for consumption. Well, despite the fact that that became illegal, they were still getting a 0 recruitment rate from the 5 species that nest there. Fish and turtles don't have passports, of course, but people are beholden to the lines on a map. And they take great pride in that. They take great pride in their country, and unfortunately those tortugueros don't have a solution on their own. So different NGOs came in there, and with the help of USAID and the support of the government, the sea turtle programs that engage those tortugueros with the same skills of hunting those turtle nests, instead of becoming the poachers, or being relegated to being the poachers, were given the opportunity to become the conservationists. And within 1 year, it went from 0 recruitment rate to a release of over 1.6 million turtle hatchlings. That's the first time in over 12 years that that's happened. So we can turn this tide very quickly, but it's a matter of synergy. Look at Islands First, for example, which is another nonprofit out there that gets together all the island nations of the Pacific and hopefully beyond to be able to band together so that not only can they make those proper decisions when they're on the front lines, but they're able to go to the UN and create a mass so that the rest of the world can not only be aware, but follow their example. Because at the end of the day, there are 3 approaches. There's advocacy, there's conservation, which is what you're involved with in terms of the MPAs, the marine protected areas, which is extraordinarily important as well. And of course, the approach we've taken is a very pragmatic one to try and connect people with restoration, which at the end of the day is about education, education and empowerment. Because as soon as you have people being hopeful, being happy, having fun, doing these things, tackling these problems, you're going to solve many of these world's problems and give back the bright future that we hope for our generations to come.
So, talked a little bit about creating awareness, which is obviously absolutely fundamental. I'd like to ask you again, Daryl, do you think there's other ways we could be slightly more controversial? Yes, there is. It is hopeful, but other ways that we could entice our leaders and celebrities to think more about fish, and as kind of Gorell says that this is the blue heart of the planet, we need to protect it. How can we entice a celebrity community to care more about the ocean? People like fluffy animals, they don't really like fish. That's one of the problems. Can you think of a way of how we might be able to make people to care more about fish? As they care about the oceans, they don't care about the fish.
And I think that also there's a long history of people being maligned for caring about the ocean-going mammals as well. You know, save the whales again.
Yeah.
Yes. No, but I mean, there's lots of creative ways to do it. Obviously, you know, the year before last, the Academy Award was won by The Cove. So there's Shark Water was also a great documentary. I mean, there's ways to wake people up by also shocking them about in terms of facing reality. And I know that, you know, there have been really successful campaigns, some with the help of Wild Aid. They did this campaign with Yao Ming about shark finning, it directed towards China. And I know, Richard, you said you guys were planning to take a plane painted like a whale shark to China and to do an awareness campaign. I mean, there's, you know, to get people engaged in these ways that are a little bit thinking out of the box is crucial. And I think, you know, I mean, the ocean, there's, you know, they may not be fluffy, but they're still friendly, you know, creatures. There's just not that many of them left, you know. And I mean, even the creatures, the mammals in the ocean that we have a much easier time relating to, the dolphins and whales and those creatures are, you know, we still use them as entertainment in theme parks and hotels and stuff. So it's a challenge, you know. It's a challenge to get people to care.
We seem to be making progress with sharks. There's been a recent ban in California for shark fin soup, which
and in Toronto
seems to be taking momentum. And here in the Maldives, you know, President Nasheed has been, you know, very visionary in banning shark fishing.
Yes, and it's already had somewhat of an impact. I've understood from several people who've been here before that the little sharks that we see right off the dock are already several times bigger than they were last year. So that's, I mean, it works. And, you know, marine protected areas work. Even though there's very little enforcement, they do have a positive effect. And to get that, you know, I mean, it seems to me like all the island states should participate in that process. It just makes sense.
So, talked a little bit about awareness. There's obviously a big job in order to create awareness, and Planes Flying Dressed as Whales is brilliant and fantastic films. What about the solution? So, you know, there's NGOs out there who say that 30% of the ocean needs to be protected. You know, my organisation is trying to make it 10%. We've already doubled the surface of ocean under protection right here in the Indian Ocean. And how, John, do you think we can work with countries to try and get governments to want to create more marine protected areas, to look at innovative funding models from the private sector to help fund these necessary marine protected areas, but also again with the awareness about educating local fishermen and local people that they need to protect these areas and that we're not taking too much away from them.
Yeah, I'm good. Before we get into the heaviness of governance, I want to stay on awareness a little bit, because let's not forget that, you know, we have a tendency to talk to a very small elite of the world's population. I've been on thousands and thousands and thousands of miles of coastline, and I talk to fishermen and people who live on the coast all the time. And when you ask them about issues like overfishing or rising sea levels or climate change, it goes not to their discredit, it goes over their heads. I came the first time to the Maldives for the New York Times in 2005, just after the tsunami. So I had the good fortune of actually being able to travel through the Maldives, which is kind of unusual. Most people come here just, you know, take a float plane out to a resort and go back. But I've been on many of these islands, and I've, you know, talked to these very sweet people whose lives are based on the ocean. Most of their families are fishermen, and we talk to them about climate change and the impact of rising seas. You know, they're looking a couple weeks down the road, a month down the road. They're not looking at 2020 or 2050. So that idea of awareness has to start with them. You know, we went and visited a little Maldivian island the other day with a population of 700 people. And as Fabien said this morning, the Maldivians have a very high literacy rate, 98%. But the principal of the elementary school said they've never before taught marine conservation in the school, and they're just starting. So that, you know, it's great for us to be aware, which is fantastic, but we have to make sure that, you know, we reach really down deep. You know, I can't count the dozens of fishermen I've talked to who who realize that they don't have as many fish anymore, or that they have to go far off the coast to get fish, but they don't connect the dots as to why that's happening. You know, they think it's just seasonal or you know, tidal or something. A big portion of them don't really understand that it's because the areas have been so badly overfished.
A great portion of that, I would imagine, is also not really from local fishermen who are fishing, you know, from small boats and single lines, but the trawling and the really destructive practices like drift netting and long lining.
Well, one of the reasons the Adriatic is so badly overfished is you watch it as the sun goes down, you know, just as the sun's going down, all the big international trawlers are going out to the 2-mile limit to start fishing. And they, you know, and the other thing about overfishing, which is really simple, is that fishing is no longer luck. You know, we have this idea that fishing is about luck. I mean, these guys, obviously, they know exactly where the fish are. They know how to catch them, etc. So
we've become way too efficient at fishing with the modern technology of helicopters and spotter planes and so on and so forth, and fast boats that have trawling nets several miles long and so on and so forth. We're polishing off what's left of the ocean's biodiversity. We lost 60% of our world's total fish stock since the late 50s. That's how good we are at it. But why do we act as hunter-gatherers in the oceans when we've stopped doing that on land 30,000 years ago? It's time for us to look for alternate solutions, and aquaculture will be one of them, to provide that protein for the vast majority of the populations of the world, which are growing, by the way, which is another issue.
I just don't even understand how trawling is still legal in the world. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. That's the craziest thing ever.
But Chris, you're in marketing. You should have the answer to this.
I've got some plans, I've got some ideas, but I'm trying not to talk too much. But let's just touch on Fabien's point about aquaculture, because obviously 1 billion people, and it tends to be the poorest people in the world who survive on fish as their main source of protein. Everybody here has the luxury to eat sushi, but you know the coast of Africa, this is their main source of protein, and that fish is being stolen from them by foreign trawlers to feed the Western demand. And so the wild fish being taken out of the ocean and stocks being depleted, aquaculture is obviously becoming, as the population grows and we get close to 8-9 billion people, we're going to need to feed the world. And aquaculture, which has its obvious problems with the fact that, you know, for 1 kilo of salmon you need 3 kilos of wild anchovies, that there's the pollution, there's the escapees. It's a very badly managed industry. It needs improvement. There are some companies doing some great stuff. But John, how do you think we need to look at aquaculture, both from sort of aquaculture from the government's point of view and from a business point of view, in order to create the need for fish, but to do it in a more sustainable way?
Well, there are two things that are in desperate need of today around the world: jobs and food. So it would make sense that if we could come up with a uninvasive way to grow fish, which we haven't succeeded at very well yet, that'd be a huge boon. You know, I've seen fish farms obviously in Chile, which are frightening in their roboticness. I've seen big tuna farms in Croatia, which are horrific in their economy, because you know they capture the big wild bluefin and they keep them in these nets, but then they feed them with 15 tons of sardines and herrings every day, and then processing boats come from Japan, pick them up, and then take them back 50 days. So imagine the energy cost just in feeding those bluefin alone. So obviously those models aren't working, but maybe there are others, maybe some deep ocean fisheries which are starting to be experimented with, etc.
No, the only thing I have a knee-jerk reaction to that, because we don't eat lions and tigers and elephants. Why is it that we pin up and fatten wild caught bluefin?
They're not furry.
Yes, but they do have a vital role as an apex predator in the oceans, as a pelagic. It's aquaculture, if it's closed system, herbivores, land-based, and polyculture preferably, and locally sourced, can be a really good model to provide those sorts of that sort of protein. I mean, I wish we could be
tilapia or catfish,
right, barramundi and all that. I mean, I would love for all of us to be as disciplined as you are. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the world doesn't have a choice or doesn't get to be an herbivore themselves. Otherwise, we'd be in much better shape.
But I've seen some really good aquaculture systems. I mean, I'm vegetarian, so it's not my thing, but I've seen them functional and working with tilapia, for example, and feeding the plants and all. They seem to work great. And as far as Dr. Sylvia Earle says, those really are the only fish that are truly sustainable fish. Are bottom feeders like tilapia and catfish, and fish you don't have to feed other fish too.
Great. So let's kind of go back to the Maldives here, where obviously the ocean is the most valuable asset. I think, nearly, correct me if I'm wrong, but 50% of your GDP comes from tourism, of people coming in to see the ocean, and the other 40% is from the fishing industry. So obviously the ocean absolutely fundamental to the economy. How can countries like the Maldives, and working with the travel and tourism industry, and working with the airlines, and working with hotels, look at innovative funding models and working with governments to actually look at creating the necessary protection in order that the oceans stay healthy for years to come?
Wow. Well, let's start from the bottom up, I guess, my perspective. If we lose the rainforests of the sea, the coral reefs, there's going to be very little debate beyond that, because that's really what most of sea life depends on at some stage in their life. Those coral reefs are a vital resource not only for the fish but for ourselves. So when you talk about the Maldives, for example, as being beholden to sea life and the richness of the oceans for 100% of their livelihood, not only tourism but also for export of fish. If there are no coral reefs, there's very little sea life, if any sea life. There's no sea life, there's no more economy. So it's a vital force to protect that. I'm stifled sometimes at the complexities of what's going on in the oceans, but at the same time, the solutions could be very, very simple. There's a carbon tax out there, right? We're all paying a carbon tax, I hope, as we leave Sabine Fushu. Why isn't there an ocean tax that helps take care of some of these things? Let's create some more MPAs. Let's create some more restoration sites where they're needed, because fish need a break like everything else. You were saying that 30%, some people want 30% of the oceans protected. You're aiming for 10, which is definitely doable. We've protected less than 1% of our oceans to date, with all the marine protected areas around the world. Yet we depend on our oceans for over 70% of our consumption every day, whether we eat fish or not. The ice cream in your freezer is made with kelp. The cereals that you eat for breakfast or with your breads, some of that fertilizer is either artificial or made of fish meal, and so on and so forth.
So just, John, in your experience, obviously traveling around the world and experiencing ocean and local communities probably more than anyone by kayak right there, what do you think the best way of, obviously, in order for marine conservation to work, and we need to get local buy-in, we need the local fishermen to feel that they are responsible for protecting the ocean, that they're not taking anything away from them. In your view, what's the best way to try and get these communities involved? And I know we've talked about awareness, but just sort of educating them and making them feel part of what's necessary.
Well, if you can get the MPA set up, which even when it does happen, we've seen it in the oldest model in the world is the Galapagos, right, which is supposedly the best protected marine reserve on the planet, and it is in many respects. It's 97% of the Galapagos are off limits to man. There's a preponderance of tourism there, and tourism is not a particularly bad place. But the mistake there is that there are so many Ecuadorians who want to come and live in Santa Cruz that they get out there, they can't find jobs, so they start poaching and shark finning, etc. So it's one thing to set up to draw that nice line on the map, but then to provide those people with an economy is a huge issue. I mean, you guys are working on the Ba Atoll here. I mean, I think that's one of your biggest challenges is finding a way for these people to benefit from the ocean. At the same time, you're making it off limits, which is, historically this has been theirs. So it's a very fine line.
Yeah, I mean, one of just before I think we're going to ask questions is it's one of the projects that we have worked on here, which is a brilliant example, and Sonna and Eva and Six Senses have been amazing at looking at how we can actually restore and protect the atoll right here. And so when people come diving in the 3 Sonida resorts, a percentage of that profit comes towards the foundation, and then we will work with UNESCO and other NGOs to fund the rangers, fund their boats and fund their wages in order to go out and protect and enforce these areas. And it's a very, very intelligent model, and if we can make this work here and then we can roll it out across the country, and I think we can have more intelligent funding mechanics, which is actually really people that are utilising the ocean. So how do we focus on divers? You know, they love the ocean. How can we put, we talk about an ocean tax, but an optional levy across the board that goes on towards marine protected areas, or the yachting industry, or the sailors, or it's talking to the surfers and the kite surfers. So I think there's lots of opportunities to raise money. It's one of the biggest issues is funding.
But to replace all those fishermen, you're going to need a lot of rangers.
Yeah.
I don't know what percentage of Maldivians are fishermen, but I'll bet it's very high. So that has to be. It's one thing for us to talk about that, drawing a line around. We did a big trip in Gabon, for example, which had an incredibly successful conservation effort, where my friend Mike Fay, who's a biologist, had walked across the entirety of the Congo, and the National Geographic published 4 stories in the magazine, and the president of Gabon, when he saw the picture, said, "Wow, what a beautiful place. We should preserve this." And they set aside 13 national parks. 11% of the country is the biggest set aside ever. But now they're struggling a little bit with how do you, once those maps are drawn, or those lines are drawn around those parks, how do you protect them? Because there are exploitive desires out there still. In Gabon, it's timber and oil, etc. Just like there's going to be pressure on the sea here continuing. That's not going to go away.
I think, Fabien and Daryl, his answer, but it's important to establish them. Once they're established, then it's about how do we then protect them and spare them. But the first thing to do is actually establish the marine reserves, and then hopefully looking at unmanned drones or satellite systems. But I'd love to know, Daryl, what
Google Ocean will hopefully be able to be helpful with that at some point as well. The thing is that all the resorts that are environmentally conscious or aiming in that direction have a unique position to be able to educate their sort of relatively small but influential clientele, to excite people about getting involved in the process. Part of the thing about global warming that's confusing to everybody is not confusing when you talk about it in regards to the ocean, because it's just the fact that the oceans are already 30% more acidic than they have been. It's just a simple pH test. It's not a debatable thing. And if we're talking about the entire food chain being in danger and compromised by acidification rising, and corals not being able to form their body parts, trilobites, or all the exoskeleton things, it's problematic. So to make people understand it in a very real way when you're an island state is actually doable, because you can show them, and then there's a lot of things that I'm curious about learning what some of these resorts are doing about issues with waste, sanitation. Obviously, I'm a big, I have composting toilets. They work great. Waterless urinals are also fantastic. I would love to see those kinds of things at resorts and get people, get used to those kinds of options and what's happening with desalination. Because obviously brine is another problem that we have to deal with, and I don't know what the forefront technology is on that, but I'd love to see. But every single aspect of what you do at resorts is a part of the educational process. Even from, most people don't even know that the sunblock that they slather themselves with also kills the reefs. You gotta have, everything's gotta be biodegradable, or it's, part of another aspect of the problem. So it's an incredible opportunity, and I don't think it has to be pedantic or anything. It can be really exciting and interesting for people to learn about these things.
What about for all those fishermen out there, to encourage them to become aquaculturists, to educate them the proper techniques that can be had in this area, low impact and so on and so forth, and empower them to do so. That way they can take that next step and we can all benefit from it.
And obviously the travel and tourism industry is the industry that's going to suffer most if we don't protect the oceans. We're already seeing jellyfish infestations in the Mediterranean. We're seeing huge swarms of jellyfish
in Lamu
in the Indian Ocean, because we're taking out their predators. So, whilst the majority of people love the sand and the palm trees, the reason why they're coming on holiday. And I asked Richard yesterday what percentage of people who go on holiday are going towards the ocean, and it was up 70–80%. So everybody that's going on holiday, they want to go by the sea, but they're not going to come to the sea if they can't go in it. So what do you think, all three of you, that the travel and tourism industry could do as a collective in order to really, those three things, raise awareness, create funding, and work with governments to look at protecting the ocean?
I think
it's a big question.
Thank you. Yeah, I think one of the things that Sononiwe do here, for example, in terms of trying to involve the tourists and the visitors with the local communities, is a great thing. Because I think if you come on holiday and you don't meet or don't see local life, it's not that that's not that different from arriving at Disneyland, you know. So I think that anything that, you know, even if it's just going out at the end of the dock and talking to the fishermen when they come in to sell their fish, or when possible going and visiting these local islands. I mean, I think that goes a long way towards furthering people's understanding of what people's lives are like out here, and then maybe they'll be more willing to change their own lives or participate somehow.
We're all in the proverbial same boat, whether we come here as visitors or that we're permanent residents here and elsewhere. You know, I don't know about you, but I certainly don't want to be relegated to eating money and drinking petroleum as a life source. So, you know, it's about working on those solutions in the same direction. You know, gosh, this is another discussion for about 1,000 years worth of, and we just don't have time for it. We need to implement solutions today. I mean, what are we all going to do as of today? When we step away from this, what is the next step? What can we do as individuals and as companies? Because at the end of the day, it's not about governments, it's not about business, it's not about individuals, it's not about local communities, it's about all of those things. And we need to work together in that same direction.
So we talked a lot about, you know, marine protected areas and helping protect the ocean. Obviously, one of the other problems is actually the fish that people are eating and serving sustainable fish. Daryl, what are your views on how we can encourage hotels, especially in areas like the Maldives, to make sure that they are serving the right fish, that they're serving only sustainable fish from sustainable sources, they're not serving endangered species?
Good luck. I don't know. I really don't. I mean, honestly, I really take Sylvia Earle's word when she said tilapia, catfish, you know, bottom feeders, done. To me, that's what you got to be creative. You know, be creative with those fish. There you go. I mean, it's harsh. People have gotten used to having a sushi restaurant on every block, and they've gotten, you know, people are. That's the same. It's a symbiotic with, you know, luxury is, you know, having your option of having salmon or Arctic char when you're in California, or what, you know, it's ridiculous. We've got to get real about it.
What do you think of a law of what fish you are allowed to serve? And, you know, we talked about the shark fin soup, and, you know, we've been able to ban trans fat in Manhattan. So why could you not ban the selling of endangered lobsters or sturgeon or bluefin tuna in a country like the Maldives?
Yeah, well, following on Daryl a little bit, you know, when I was growing up, fish in the Midwest of the United States, fish was fish sticks.
Fish sticks.
And that's all I knew about fish, you know. But 20 years later, our palate became more sophisticated. We were told that, you know, fish was better for you than red meat, more protein, etc. And we started this huge run on fish. And as Daryl says, now literally we expect a sushi joint on every block. We go into a supermarket and we want that refrigerator to be stuffed with every kind of fish imaginable. We go to a restaurant, we want not one item on the menu, we want 5 different fish. So I mean, it's our demand that's killing these places. Not I mean, they wouldn't. It's like the oil industry. They wouldn't keep drilling deep for oil if we didn't keep demanding it. You know, they wouldn't keep overfishing if we didn't keep demanding it in one capacity or another. So I guess changing that demand, or at least shifting, as you suggest, the kinds of fish we're after will make a difference. But as long as we just keep chasing anything and everything, yeah.
So would you agree that it would be a good idea to put a law together of what fish you can and cannot serve, or not?
Well, that would then depend kind of region by region, country by country, but I mean, if you could figure that out, sure.
Daryl, do you think it's a good idea?
I just think it's all a symptom of the larger problem. I mean, we look at we don't relate to these things as natural systems, and that all the fish having their place within that system. We're looking at it as a resource, not a natural system, not a functional, you know. And I think it's our mindset of looking at things as resources for us to pillage and plummet. It's not. We have a sickness.
Well, maybe if you go with that, eat locally or grow, you know, only things that are grown 10 miles, 20 miles, 50 miles from home. You should be only able to eat fish that come from a 50-mile radius, which means you're out of luck if you live in Kansas or Nebraska.
And within season and everything.
Yeah.
I mean, we continue, even to this day, still treat our planet as an endless resource at a garbage can.
I can't tell you how many environmental events I've been to, and even one that was honoring Dr. Earl when she was like making her announcement about creating these marine protected areas, and they serve sushi. You know, it's just like, it's not a, you know, it's just, it's ironic, but then people are like, oh, we're going to honor Dr. Silverio, let's have a fish dinner.
So how do we make sushi unfashionable? Because at the moment,
it's a disconnect.
Nobu is fashionable, and now we're moving into the growing markets of China. Sushi is becoming fashionable again. How could we use, again, celebrity to only go to sustainable?
Mercury Poisoning is doing it.
Well, that's good, yeah.
A bit. You know, just getting the information out there. Obviously, that's still the same thing. Getting people to start reconnecting with our need to have a respectful relationship to the natural world and live more harmoniously with it, basically.
Do we need to have fish-free Mondays, something like a fish-free, meat-free Fridays?
Thursdays.
Is there anything you guys want to add before? I think there's quite a few people here who feel pretty passionate about the oceans, and I can already see some questions coming. Is there anything you want to kind of add, closing remarks about? I think those three things again: awareness, funding, and governance. Or anything kind of.
Well, as far as the group right here, well, I definitely encourage you, if you haven't done so already on this beautiful island, to go snorkeling. That way, it'll give you a more of a contact with what is under that blue veneer. And if you can, or if you want to, or if you have a license already, go diving, because at the end of the day, it's about the experience. It's about the touch. It's about the sights, the sounds, and we can talk about oceans forever, but without actually having that personal connection, it's all statistics. It's all just information that doesn't have a soul. As soon as we have that personal connection, as ambassadors right here in this room, or this beach, we then can talk about it in a much more impassioned way that may carry with it a bit more hope and a slight tone of essence for the future.
I have one question for Fabien.
Yeah, of course.
This would have been the 100th birthday of your grandfather.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I launched Planet of Fish last year for the 100th.
So the 100th, but this year has been
yes,
the year
it's
celebrating
the endless year of the 100th.
Yeah. What do you think Jacques would have made of the state of affairs in the world's oceans today?
Well, you know, and the progression's been going on for several decades, so he was very well aware and quite a visionary as to what we're facing today. He testified in front of Congress almost 40 years ago about what he thought would happen and what we'd be facing today. He said we have 30, 40, maybe 50 years before we go over that precipice and can't change the course that we've set for ourselves. So we have about 10 years if we're going to find that as a guide. That said, he was a hopeful. He was an optimist, a realist as well. But I think that although devastated by some of the news that's out there, there are definitely hope spots that are not only in need of preservation and conservation, but there's also the human will that he very much believed in that can change those things and create those miracles at the very last minute if pushed to it, if encouraged to do so.
I guess I would just like to just add that it's a really good idea to start with yourself, you know, and I know we are all thinking about the big picture, and everybody here has really big brains and got big plans and doing amazing stuff, but also to really think about it on a personal level as well, and get yourself off the grid. Stop using disposable stuff. I mean, just all those simple, basic things that we all know, but really do it yourself, because that's always the best place to start and to work out, obviously, from there. But personal responsibility is huge part. If we all did that, we wouldn't be in the problem that we're in. So.
John? Do you think that we need to have ocean champions within government, because we have fisheries ministers now, but there isn't anybody who's taking full responsibility for the ocean, Fabien?
President Nasheed is doing it.
But he's not a specific role. As a president, yes, but he's doing a lot of other things, but a particular department.
Well, I absolutely think that government is part of the solution, an integral part of the solution. It's the rails for the train, isn't it? We are beholden to and need to have those guidelines and those people in those positions of power to be able to at least give us the parameters with which, or vote them in office if we, because we believe in them, to give us those parameters as a universe, as a country. To be able to guide us towards better solutions. That said, we can't rely 100% on the government. The government is only so strong as its people, and if the people don't participate and don't agree with those decisions and don't help, whether it be businesses or individuals, then the government can only do so much. So yes, absolutely, government needs to be in it, the business decision makers need to be in it, and the individuals themselves need to be in it as well.